I'm going to call to order the Board of Selectmen's meeting for Monday, November 21st, 2016. And before we start the meeting, recent casualties among American servicemen and women who are risking their lives on our front lines to protect our freedoms remind us how what a tough fight it is to protect democracy and how liberty requires great sacrifice. And for that reason, and to recognize that we are a united nation that defends liberty, we pledge allegiance to our flag. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, first item on the agenda is citizens' concerns about items that are not otherwise listed on the agenda to be discussed tonight. Ms. Friedrichs.
All right, Tara Fredericks, West Acton. First of all, I want to thank you for your support of looking at alternatives to fossil fuel, increasing fossil fuel infrastructure. I saw, I think, as Katie was meeting with Jim Snyder Grant and Deborah, and I really support that. I met Chris Gonzalez's mother, passed away this past week, and we're all very sad. She was a teacher at McCarthy Town School and a great leader here in Acton. And at her memorial gathering, Martin Orio and Matt Orio, they work on geothermal exchange systems, and so they look forward to bringing a presentation here to show us how affordable and responsible those solutions are. So that's the first thing. The other thing is I wanted to, I had been corresponding with you relative to the Kelly's Corner committee charge, and it was my understanding that Peter had directed staff to take the Kelly's Corner committee out from underneath the Acton 2020 committee, and so I was concerned about that there hadn't been discussion about that, so I wanted to see actually if that had happened. So I wrote to Peter, and I think you said that you had discussed it with the Board of Selectmen in your comments, and I had responded that that wasn't what I thought was a discussion, more just you writing your comments. And then you forwarded an email from staff that indicated that there was a vote to do that, and so I had responded back that if that was a vote, then you would be able to tell me when that vote was, and so I was just curious when that happened, when there was an actual vote, so I could look at the minutes and confirm.
When we voted to reconstitute the Kelly's Corner Committee?
To take it out from under the Acton 2020.
Well, we didn't vote to take it out from under the Acton 2020. The original charge required that most of the members, not most of the members, but some of the members, there are members from various other committees in town on the Kelly's Corner Committee, including the FinCom, the EDC, the HDC, and other members of the committee were required to be members of 2020. We removed the requirement that the members of the Kelly's Corner Committee be members of 2020 for a couple of reasons. One is we reduced the membership of Acton 2020 committee from 7 to 5 because they didn't have enough members to get a quorum with 7 members. And since that committee had been reduced, it made sense to remove the requirement from the Kelly's Corner committee that they be members of Acton 2020. There still is one slot on the Kelly's Corner committee that is required to be a member of Acton 2020. It doesn't prohibit other members from 2020 from also being assigned to Kelly's Corner, but it also doesn't require them. Now, what date we did that, I can't tell you. Lisa may be able to. She's pretty good about remembering dates, but it was on the agenda. It was posted. If I remember, the reorganization was probably on the consent agenda.
Thank you. No, that wasn't my issue. My issue wasn't about changing who the members were. It was my understanding that you had taken out that committee from under the Acton 2020 group, because it was a subcommittee working group of Acton 2020. And so if that reorganization took place, I would expect that there would have actually been a discussion and a vote as opposed to just the...
It wasn't just, Kelly's Corner Committee is not a subcommittee of 2020.
Okay, then that was
It's an independent committee that has a completely separate charge from Acton 2020.
Thank you for the clarification.
It's just the original charge required that certain slots also be members of 2020.
Okay, thank you for that clarification. I didn't understand that. And then my last comment, the other things are on the agenda, but my last question or comment was relative to Board of Selectmen members directing committees to do things, either to put things on their agenda or not put things on their agenda. And I took a look at the traditions handbook of the Board of Selectmen. When I was a selectman, we had collectively worked on that, and there was a big discussion about selectmen not meddling in committee business. And so I just wanted to update my understanding of that as well. Is it that your understanding that the selectmen do not tell the committees what to do, or what's your understanding?
I think committees should bring things, the committees are where ideas and proposals get worked out, and committees ought to bring to the selectmen, it ought to bubble up from the bottom, basically, that the selectmen should not dictate from the top down, but the committees do the work that does the research and the debate and the policy, looks at the policy issues, and then brings recommendations to the Board of Selectmen.
Thank you. That was my understanding, too. I just wanted to hear it again. Thank you.
Ann Shine, I'm sorry to continue this, but first I wanted to say I thought that the Main Street paving job went very, very well and was much faster than I thought, and it looks really great. But Stowe Street in South Acton and Liberty Street in South Acton have also been repaved for maybe 2 years now, and there are no lines on them. And when it's really dark, we're in great danger when you pull over of falling into the swamp. And I really think we should have at least a center line and some fog lines on those two streets, and I would like to recommend that you ask that they be done. Thank you.
Okay, well, thank you. I didn't realize there are no fog lines either on either street.
No, this is just, I'm talking about Stowe Street and Liberty Street. No, there's no painting at all, so there's no center line nor are there fog lines. And on Stowe Street, there really need to be fog lines because of the swamp.
Okay, well, I note that the town DPW director is here tonight to speak on another matter. You might have a conversation with him to see if that's on the agenda at all. I don't know if the town manager has any response to that. Okay.
And I also think the Main Street looks great, and I'm so excited to see our first bike lane. Very exciting. But the last one is about the concept of clients. I've heard several staff members, and I can talk to Steve about that separately, but I'd like to hear what the board thinks or what you think about this, that referring to developers as clients. I feel like that's a dangerous practice, and I would like to hear what you think about that. It's not on the agenda, it's a citizen's concern. So at some point I would like to either have that on the agenda as a discussion, the idea of developers being treated as clients. So,
okay.
Thank you.
Okay, seeing no further citizens' concerns, we'll move on to the chairman's update. I first want to address community issues. We've had some tragic instances in the last few weeks of students taking their own lives. There also is an ongoing opioid crisis in Acton. We're not immune from that crisis. There recently was a veteran who took his own life by an opioid overdose in town. That's another form, obviously, of suicide. There's been much discussion in the community about responses to this issue, and also the disturbances that people feel about the election and disputes that it's caused between people, whichever side you're on. I attended a seminar this week, last week actually, that the schools and social service agencies, the town's social service provider, Laura Duchamp, put on by a psychologist who deals with issues of suicide prevention. Had a lot of good ideas about particularly young people who are at risk for committing suicide. The basic thought that came out of that discussion was that we need to come together as a community to support each other in this time, and that's the best way to try to identify kids who might be at risk or other people who might be at risk and try to prevent these kind of tragedies from happening. The United Way is heavily involved in this. On December 8th, they will be presenting their community needs forum, which they gather all the leaders of various social service agencies, governments from Acton and Boxborough, and try to determine what the greatest needs are that people see in the community and prepare their funding to address those issues. They will also have, as part of that, a moderated discussion about suicide prevention issues. I know the Commission on Disabilities has been addressing this issue. Questions have been raised about whether the town should do something about it, so the Selectmen will be having more of a discussion about that. But certainly, if you're interested in getting involved in that, contact the United Way, contact local churches, your social organizations, Laura Duchamp, to find ways in which you might be able to help prevent those kind of problems in the future. There's also the Acton Boxborough Diversity Coalition that works on trying to deal with discrimination, hate crime issues that certainly we are also not immune from. That coalition has been in place for several years now. It took the place of a former group called No Place for Hate. They put on a yearly breakfast on Martin Luther King Day that deals with hate crime issues and ways to address those problems. So there are a lot of people in the community that are working on these issues. We're open to any suggestions people may have. It's a little difficult, I think, for the town as an organization to sponsor kinds of responses to this thing. We certainly support them. We're working with the United Way. Our social services coordinator is working with the schools, other groups in town, churches, other groups in town that are addressing this issue on the front lines. But please become involved, be aware of the issue, and do whatever you can to try to help out and prevent these kind of tragedies from happening. I don't know if any other selectmen have anything they want to add to that. Okay. Let's see what else I got on my chairman's report. There is a initiative by, I believe it's the REI company, that is working to get people outside on Black Friday rather than inside shopping. And Acton is participating in this effort called Opt Outside to get people outside on Black Friday, the day after Thanksgiving. There's free accessible transportation door to door as needed to 3 accessible outdoor spots. You can also go there and meet us there without taking the transportation, but the locations are Narrow Park. I believe that's at 10 a.m. You can get outside at Narrow Park, our beautiful facility in North Acton, Nathaniel Allen Recreation area, and at 10 a.m. there'll be a free Tai Chi class that people can participate in. I believe it's 11 o'clock at the Acton Arboretum. There'll be refreshments, a free nature walk led by our naturalist Tom Tidman, who, if you haven't met Tom or gone on any walks with him, he really knows his stuff. Very interesting. You learn a lot by walking with Tom, I'll tell you that. 11:30, I'm sorry, that is. And the Acton Discovery Museum's Discovery Woods Treehouse and Trail will be open. That's the new treehouse. The Community Preservation Committee and town meeting funded part of the construction of that, and if you haven't been there, it's a great time for adults and kids in the outdoors woods area that's built as a tree house with lots of activities. If you want to contact Cheryl Ball in, I believe, the health department is Cheryl. She's on the town website, and her phone number's on the website. Look up the health department to get more information about those activities. I'm sorry?
Her personal number at the health department is 929-6453, I believe, and she's able to check those messages until Friday. So if people, after town hall closes, wanted to request a ride and wanted to participate, it's important that they call that number rather than the main health department number. That's why I interrupted to give that number.
Want to just give us that again?
Yes, 978-929-6453.
Okay.
Thanks.
Black Friday outside. You'll notice that since Main Street has been paved, we have a new bike lane. It only goes one way because the width of Main Street, I just spoke again to the town DPW director and Public Works director. He's planning on trying to widen the road so that we can get another lane on the other side. That is part of the $400,000 grant we received from the state under the Complete Streets program, try to get people walking and biking and other modes of transportation other than automobiles. But we have a bike lane now that goes from Kelly's Corner down to the train station. Eventually, the concept is that it would connect up the Assabet River Rail Trail, which will come to South Acton, with the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail that'll run along 2A and go further north. So congratulations. As a guy that rides his bike a lot, I'm really happy to see that, particularly on Main Street. The Community Preservation Coalition or Committee, the Community Preservation Committee accepted the applications for funding. They closed on November 14th. We had applications totaling $1,003,000 with about $1 million to give out. It looks like we will get about $190,000 from the state this year, which is greatly reduced from what we've gotten in the past. And with the money that we collected from the surcharge, we'll have about $1 million. And so we'll have to try to make some decisions about what we can fund with the resources we have available. The City of Boston has accepted the Community Preservation Act, which is going to further reduce the amounts available to cities and towns. They will gobble up most of the state resources, which are funded from filing fees on instruments that are filed at the State Registry of Deeds. And so those state resources are going to dwindle as we go forth, although there is work being done to try to rekindle those and increase the fees and therefore increase the amount of resources available. So other than that, I don't have anything further on my chairman's report. Mr. Town Manager.
Just a couple things. First of all, the Capital Improvement Planning Committee held a meeting a week ago and took a tour of the highway garage and looked at that facility. Their next meeting will be basically to hear about the school capital projects, and that's going to be a big public meeting, I think, on the 8th of December. So, as you recall, the game plan for the Capital Improvement Planning Committee is to try to integrate both the town's capital needs and the school's capital needs, so that we can kind of smooth out our capital program. A week ago, we had a hearing in front of the Department of Public Utilities on our aggregation plan. It went well, but we are told by our consultant that the DPU sometimes takes up to 2 months to approve the aggregation plan. So we're still working on a timeline that would enable us to roll out aggregation rates in March, but if there's too much of a delay, we might have to put that off a little bit. We will be meeting with our consultant in executive session on January 9th, to talk about some of the strategies related to that. But apparently DPU just takes a long time, even though it's pretty pro forma. So that's my report.
Okay, I think I forgot this, but I'm just going to take a minute at each one of these meetings to talk about upcoming agenda items that people might be interested in. On December 5th, our next meeting, we're going to have a discussion about natural gas alternatives, and that's a green issue, whether the town would encourage new development to use electricity with heat pumps off the grid versus natural gas, and what ways we can go about trying to encourage that. There will be a discussion about a possible dog park in Acton on December 5th, already generating a lot of interest. I think we're going to expand that discussion beyond dog parks to just include general issues dealing with dogs in town. And then a citizens group has requested that the town consider putting a conservation restriction on the property on Arlington Street that was previously designated as school property, came back to the town as part of the regionalization, and so that it's now just general town use. It was proposed for a senior center, but that was opposed by the neighborhood, and therefore that didn't move forward. So certain neighbors are asking that the town meeting warrant in the spring have a conservation restriction for the Arlington Street property. So we'll have a discussion about that on December 5th as well. So the next item on the agenda is the West Acton sewer discussion.
Good evening. As you know, my name's Corey York. I'm the DPW director for the town. I'm here tonight with a consultant, Joe Shea and Jack Troidel from Woodward and Curran. We're here tonight to give sort of an update on looking at the extension of sewers into West Acton. We've been, as you know, it's come up as a goal, one of your goals back in June when you were goal setting. But it's also something that's come up through the 2020 plan. It was identified through their ensuring environmental sustainability. And in that action item, it triggers that as one of the high priority locations through the comprehensive water resource management plan, in which that committee went looking townwide at different need areas, identifying, they identified like 5 high priority locations, this being one of them. So has been working down through that list. We're sort of evaluating the extension. We're here tonight just to give you an overview, and Jack and Joe are going to kind of go through more of the technical information related to it and kind of get you up to speed of where we are. So I just kind of wanted to give a brief intro to where we are, and I'll kind of hand the mic over to them so they can walk you through it.
I think we have a hand. Oh, okay, you're going to use the mics at the table. That's fine.
Good evening, and thank you for having us. Once again, I'm Joseph Shea. I'm a senior principal with Woodard & Curran, an engineering consulting firm in Dedham, Massachusetts, who's been working with the town on sewer matters for almost 20 years. And with me tonight is Jack Troidel. Jack is our project manager with 15 years of experience and has worked on various Acton initiatives from the sewer extension at the lower end of High Street to some of the pump station work that's been done over the last decade or so. And tonight we're going to introduce some concepts for a West Acton Center sewer extension project such that we can try to start to support the town in building a foundation of discussion for the various factors in a sewer extension up to West Acton Center. By way of a little history, in the 1960s in Acton, discussion on sewers began, and in the 1980s, my understanding is there was the first approval for a small commercial district with sewers in Acton. In the 90s, there was much progress on some of the concepts for sewers, and that's when I had entered. I'm very familiar that in the 2000s, the first wastewater treatment facility for public sewers in Acton was built down on Adams Street, and there were 3 different construction contracts for sewer extensions in what was called the Middle Fort Pond Brook Sewer Project. In parallel with the Middle Fort Pond Brook Sewer Project, in 2004, the town had completed its comprehensive wastewater resource management plan, a very large DEP-required document that outlines the areas within the town of Acton where the town would consider a public sewer system as an option over the course of 30 years. So it's a long-term 30-year planning document. It also identifies the areas in town where existing on-site septic systems are believed to be sufficient given the geology, the topography, or the density in those various areas. In 2008, a feasibility study was completed for both the West Acton Center and the Spencer Tuttle Flint neighborhoods. And it was a concept of very similar to some of the factors we'll discuss tonight about the pros, the cons, the challenges and the benefits of sewering the areas of West Acton Center and Spencer Tuttle Flint. One key difference for anybody who's gone onto the DocuServe online document server to find that report is that the West Acton Center design stopped at the railroad tracks. It did not continue over the railroad tracks to Central Street, whereas tonight we'll be talking about a concept that does continue further towards the Boxborough line. Everybody clearly understands the economy changed in 2009. Many things changed, and the West Acton Center Spencer Tuttle Flint project really lost all momentum, as did many things. But West Acton Center is back, and earlier this year, a basis of design report was completed in August. I understand that's also available in the DocuServer, dated August 12th, that outlines the considerations that would be used in a design of a sewer system expansion in West Acton Center. And tonight, what we would like to do is talk to you about the concepts, the framework for a sewer extension, such to seed a robust discussion over the course of the next several months about what it means to potentially extend sewers into West Acton Center. So I realize I'm in Acton and people have a strong understanding of where West Acton Center is, but when you look at Route 2 cutting through Acton, I'm going to try to use the Route 2 is what comes in from the top of the slide on the left-hand side and out. West Acton Center is below it. And one of the reasons that we're here to talk about West Acton Center is that it was identified as one of the next 3, quote, needs areas in the comprehensive wastewater management plan. A needs area is an area in town that meets the Massachusetts DEP's criteria indicating that on-site septic systems may not be the best long-term solution for dealing with wastewater in these areas. Sometimes needs areas make that list because of density of houses. Sometimes they make that list because of topography. Sometimes they make that list because of geology, because of a lot of rock or wetlands in the area where on-site septic systems may not work well or may impact water quality. West Acton Center, in our opinion, also is an appropriate location to look at because of the economic development opportunities that sewers could unlock in West Acton Village. That certainly also speaks directly to the Selectmen's short-term and long-term goals about looking at West Acton Center and development opportunities and sewers and how they relate to those development opportunities. So for the purposes of discussion and the basis of design report, we have outlined an area for consideration of sewers. I want to be very clear, this is a concept to foster the discussion. Now, this in no way means that if your parcel is shaded yellow, you're guaranteed sewer, and if your parcel is not shaded yellow, you're not guaranteed sewer. It's being used to seed the concept discussion. With that, I'm going to hand it over to Jack Troidel to talk through some of the specifics of the parcels.
Thank you, Joe. On this map, we've highlighted the 183 parcels that we've looked at topography and location, crossing the tracks in West Acton Center and making it all the way to the east, the right side of the map, to Prospect Street where the existing sewer connection is. So we're essentially conveying flow from the left side of the map to the right side. We've looked at topography. We generally try to sewer the areas with a gravity sewer. That's the cheaper alternative. You'll see a couple black boxes. Those represent pump stations where we needed to lift the flows to convey them ultimately across the stream over to Prospect Street. And we're looking at, right now, we're including the large parcel on the top of the map, the Gates and Douglas schools. We've got those included. They'll require their own pump station to convey flow up to Arlington Street. That area located near Arlington Street would get pumped from that pump station all the way across Mass Ave. Of this area, there are about 350 to 500 SBUs. That's a preliminary conceptual range. In the design effort, that's where we would refine that and come up with very precise numbers. And again, the flow value is, or the flow need is 26,000 gallons per day. As parcels, if they shift in or out, that number could change slightly. Joe.
Just to also add a little bit of context to that, an SBU is a sewer betterment unit. It is the unit that was established in Acton for billing sewer costs or capital cost recovery in the past. So as part of this basis of design report, we've used the historic model that Acton had used in the Middle Fort Pond Brook sewer project. Moving forward, however, it's up to the Board of Selectmen and Sewer Commissioners as we proceed forward what models for financing the project feel like the right model. So even though we've listed SBUs, we want to be very clear that each project is allowed to have its own financial structure and its own decision-making structure. And then the other component, I'll ask Jack to just in case this can't be seen as clearly for people at home, to just outline what streets limit the edges of the yellow, the concept area shaded in yellow.
Sure. On towards the bottom of the map, we come down Central Street, and shortly after Willow Street branches off, we'll pick up that lower section. On the west side of West Acton Center, we go beyond Mead Terrace to Wright Terrace. We proceed up Central Street. I think it's around the last house that you have there before you have a wooded area, but we cross the tracks. We have a railroad crossing there. That'll be a permitting effort we have to go through. And then we go up Arlington Street to just after West Road. Is a pump station in that vicinity. This location is not precisely where it is, but that'll be identified in the design. And then, as I mentioned earlier, we're conveying the flows to the east to Prospect Street, near Prospect Street where the existing sewers are. So we're picking up the properties along the way there.
And one of the drivers for all of the houses along Massachusetts Avenue is that under your current betterment bylaw, if sewer infrastructure crosses or touches the frontage of your parcel, you are in the sewer district. So we would be passing all of those parcels on Massachusetts Avenue as you get towards Knowlton and towards Deacon Hunt, and by your bylaw, we've added those parcels in because they would be in the sewer district, and that becomes one of the criteria that gets used and discussed over the course of the next several months as a map such as this gets refined.
The 26,000 gallons a day of flow from West Acton Center has to go somewhere. So we took a look at the plant, and the treatment facility has a discharge capacity limit of 299,000 gallons per day. We looked at the flow going to the plant from the currently connected parcels. That's 130,000 gallons average day flow. And then using an evaluation of the current permit limit and the high flows going to the plant, we determined that the capacity, remaining capacity that could be allocated to future users was 68,000 gallons. West Acton Center at 26,000 gallons. If that's the first project to be connected, there's still a delta. And we presented up here the Kelly's Corner. You know, that's an upcoming project. The capacity is unknown, or we don't have that number. And Spencer Tuttle Flint, which we've previously looked at, is 21,000 gallons a day. I'll show you how we calculated some of those flows. What's interesting in Acton, from the inception of the treatment plant, we have 16 years of data presented on this graph. So it's pretty neat to have that much continuous operating data. The blue line that you're looking at, that is the real weekly, essentially the real flows going into the plant. We put on the purple dots, those are the highest daily flows per each year, and we connected the 3 high dots and compared that to the permit limit, and that's where we get that 68,000 gallons a day. So with West Acton Center at 26,000 gallons, that leaves 42,000 of remaining capacity that could be allocated to other projects. And the red line is that 299,000 state permit limit for the plant.
I mean, you may be looking at the one purple dot that's up high on the chart. That is March 2010, when the state of Massachusetts had its 100-year storm event. Many people remember that we got 2 rainstorms, one in the middle of the month, one towards the end of the month, really, that were amazing events. People who've never had water in their basement had water in their basements. We have discounted that event for the purposes of planning your wastewater system. Because statistically, if you're in violation of flow once every 100 years, I think that's going to be okay. We want to make sure that we use reasonable peak day flow for the purposes of determining your available wastewater capacity.
Actually, I'm going to hand it back to you, Joe.
Thank you very much, Jack. So based upon the concept that was presented for discussion, we have prepared a conceptual cost estimate of $10.5 million, and that's to service the 183 parcels as shown. The design basis report has some discussions about various funding options. State loans right now, state revolving fund loans at 2% interest are the most common tool that our municipal clients are using to fund water and sewer infrastructure projects. Because of the economic development opportunities in West Acton, economic development grants such as a MassWorks grant that are due every August or September certainly should be discussed as a potential funding option. We've listed betterments because that's a precedent set in Acton with the Middle Fort Pond Brook project. We've also listed state paving funds as a funding option because Route 111, Massachusetts Avenue, is effectively 5 lanes wide in some areas because of parking on both sides, then 2 drive lanes, then a turning lane. That's a fairly well-traveled section of roadway, and with many clients we've worked with them to try to seek additional state paving funds to handle the cost of paving or correcting a roadway that's 5 lanes wide instead of your traditional lateral roadway that might be 28 feet wide. And then there's a list of other possible funding sources that we would recommend exploring over the next few months. We've already talked about bicycle lane programs. If the Douglas and Gates schools are in, there are safe schools or safe travelways. I forget the exact name of it, but there are programs associated with connecting bike lanes and roadways and sidewalks into schools. And there are certainly opportunities to build an economy of scale with the private electric companies, private gas utilities, or the Acton Water District on a project of this magnitude. If you're opening up roads, this many roads, it would be prudent to try to get other infrastructure correct and proper in those roadways and share some of the fixed costs associated with these projects. Moving forward, we've outlined a schedule in the report. We are always looking, what I do, determine the funding option, so that's always ongoing. We have submitted a state revolving fund loan application on the town's behalf already because the schedule, the deadline was going to pass, and we hope to hear in the next 2 months. There is no requirement that you take that money if you make the list. We had the opportunity to try to give you an alternative for funding, so we've made sure we got an application in on time. We are here to kick off the public outreach and discussions section, which we recommend happen between now and town meeting, so that we can build a foundation of solid information and awareness for those people who may be asked to vote on this project if you choose to put it on the town meeting agenda in April. If you choose to put it on your town meeting agenda in April, a traditional schedule has been laid out of detailed design into October of 2017, and then construction beginning in summer of 2018. That is tied to, this is assuming a state revolving fund project. The state has timing on the way they disperse the money. But the important component from this schedule slide is that people could connect at the earliest in November of 2019, so 3 years from right now would be the earliest possible connections. And final paving would still be 9 months later, or the summer of 2020. So a very important component to us as we start these discussions is if this project is gaining momentum, if somebody needs to do a septic system repair or modification and they're potentially in the area, we want to make sure that the Department of Health knows. We don't want anybody, we wouldn't recommend anybody put in a brand new sewer system now that they would have another option in 3 or 4 years. And that's an important part of this outreach, to make sure that we're thinking well ahead, we're communicating well ahead, and we're trying to do the right thing for the constituents that may be connecting to the sewer down the road. With that, we'd like to open up to any questions or discussions that the board may have.
Jin Sung, you want to start?
No, I think I would prefer to have some time to think about this a little bit.
Okay. Janet?
Yeah, I actually am glad to see this at least starting to be discussed. I think that I wasn't on the board the last time that there was an attempt to expand the sewer district. I got onto the board in time to be the liaison to the Spencer Tuttle Flint neighborhood, a committee that had been set up to try to make the Hatfields and the McCoys come to compromise. It was really ultimately futile, but one of the things that came out of the discussion is the importance to the people who will be affected if the sewer line goes in of the cost. It's the cost that they bear for having the sewer line go by, but then also there's the cost in the event that they decide to hook up. So with that in mind, I think, has there been, I have a number of questions and I don't know how to handle them, but one of my first questions is, would you people be handling public outreach, or do you use people who are accustomed to doing public outreach about sewering? Especially given our history, our recent history with the sewer district expansion and some of the controversy that arose. I mean, it was voted down at town meeting, and I think one of the things I remember, I was on Conservation Commission, and I felt as if there was this pressure, there was sort of a time it seemed a little bit rushed, and because at that time there was the ERA, the federal funding for shovel-ready projects, and I think there was some interest in taking advantage of that. But I honestly knew nothing about sewers at that point, and I just had the feeling that maybe if there had been a little better public outreach, that maybe the vote at town meeting would have been successful. So that's my first question. I've already talked about cost. I do remember, I will go on and then I'll let you answer the questions, but I do remember the March 2010 flooding, because at that point I was campaigning, and there was some sort of forum here. The League of Women Voters was hosting it. My husband was planning to go, but he was in our basement for over 24 hours bailing. I felt really bad for him, but I'm wondering also how much of the total $10.5 million anticipated cost would be covered by something other than bonding, because when I was dealing with the Neighborhood Task Force Committee, they heard presentations from the then treasurer/assistant town manager about bonding for sewering and that sort of thing. So I don't know how much of those other alternative funding sources would amount to. Third question, would the sewer pipe go under the brook, way under the brook? I assume that would be the case, somewhere under the bed, because I know that there was something in the letter that said that you'd have to go under not just the railroad, you'd have to go under, I think, the brook or the stream. And then I assume that I know that there was a comment, I think, in one of the pieces of material about needing to notify the water district. I think that if and when this project goes forward, there would be need to have, real involvement of the water district to make sure that the piping for the sewer lines obviously have to go underneath. I assume they have to go underneath the water district pipes. And I'd like to know what, at some point, you don't have to talk about it now, but I'd like to eventually find out what it is that you do with sewer lines to make sure that if they fail, they don't somehow, the contents don't end up contaminating the groundwater, which of course our town relies on heavily. And, God, I can't read my, okay. I recall from the Neighborhood Task Force discussions hearing about the supersizing of I guess, the water treatment plant. I don't know if that, but some sort of cost and it was referred to in the materials. It wasn't put upon the users in the district because they're a fairly small number, and I think it was probably to control the cost for them, but I didn't know what happened to this extra cost that I recall hearing that it was going to be borne by the taxpayers, but I don't really know. I've forgotten. I haven't dealt with the issue in 6 years, so I'd appreciate any refreshing about that. So I'll leave it at that for now, because I think my colleagues would probably like to ask questions, but if you have answers to the questions, if you've marked them down, I would appreciate it.
I did write them down. I think I tracked them all.
Okay.
On a public outreach strategy, we do have specialists who work on public outreach for communities. They are available and we can certainly add them. However, we want to make sure that we partner with the selectmen, with the town's administration to make sure we've got the right approach for public outreach. We don't have a one-size-fits-all solution. We don't think that would be the right answer, so we'd like to partner with you to craft the right solution. I certainly agree. We want to make sure in any community that we can inform the town meeting voters as much as possible with these potential articles that impact just a percentage of the town, not necessarily the whole town. There are strategies available to do so. However, it is a vote of the full town meeting body and not the subset of yellow parcels. So we would like to partner with you to try to make sure that we can best support the town in getting that education out between now and any town meetings that will be coming up. The next one we assume is in April. For how much of the $10.5 million could be, quote, other, at that point that it is indeterminate. We've seen MassWorks grants that are now being released. Some of them are to our clients that are $1 million or $1.5 million. That would be a wonderful amount of money to try to offset out of the 10.5, given the competitive landscape for MassWorks grants. But we certainly would look for any opportunity, even if it's $100,000 or a $50,000 grant. It all absolutely helps lower the betterments. And at times we are asked to sewer just standard residential neighborhoods. That's a rather vanilla sewer project, but it doesn't give you many options. West Acton Center with your schools, with your transportation connections, with your economic development opportunities, there are many avenues for funding, and we'd like to work with you to identify those and try to bracket what we potentially could achieve from those. That being said, I'll put an asterisk on it that it's a very competitive world and everybody's trying to get a hold of those dollars. I'm going to let Jack handle the will we go under the brook.
Yeah, the stream crossing, there are two ways you can do that. You can go under the brook, or sometimes you run a pipe along the bridge. We don't have that nailed down. That's something we would do in the design next year if the project proceeds. But there are directional drilling. This is a force main that would be going through, so it's the pipe can go over, can go under. You can directional drill it under, so you don't have to open cut and dig across the stream. So there are definitely several options to minimize any impacts to the environmental areas. And I'll carry the next comment as well, notifying the water district. That's an effort we do during the design. We seek all of their their as-built plans on where their water mains are, and other utilities as well. Typically we maintain 10 feet horizontal separation between the water and sewer pipes, so there's no conflicts there. The standard sewer pipe is a PVC pipe with gasketed connections. They're tight, and Acton's current sewer system is very tight. It has minimal II. Generally speaking, you don't have leaks out or significant leaks in, like you see with older systems with the clay pipes. The new PVC pipes are very, very good product. Most of the extraneous flows you may see are sump pumps and things of that nature. So,
and I will hit on my understanding of what was informally called the supersizing. But in the original Middle Fort Pond Brook Sewer Project, which was a $25.4 million total project, there were costs within that project that were determined to be general benefit costs, meaning the sewer pipes and the treatment plant portions were oversized for future users who had yet to be identified. And that, I'm going to try to recall, it was about $1.4 million in general benefit costs. And those general benefit costs were recouped as people either changed the use of their parcel or the sewer system expanded. My last understanding from Doug Halley on that is about 90% of the supersizing costs had been recouped. But I don't have an exact number, but I know I felt a sense of pride in that the model had worked and that there were beneficial changes of use, especially in Kelly's Corner, where there were uses that septic systems wouldn't allow. The sewer system allowed those changes in use, and people paid or purchased that extra capacity, that general benefit. So I only have the general numbers on the supersizing.
Thank you very much. That was very helpful.
Oh, Katie.
Thanks, Peter. Thank you very much for this report and all the work you've done on this and with us for very many years now related to sewer. I had some questions just about the capacity issue. So is the 26,000 gallons per day estimated sort of based on current uses in West Acton?
correct. We looked at the water records over several years. We looked at the wintertime use to exclude irrigation uses. But yeah, water use for the current uses.
Okay, and do you do anything to sort of anticipate, a part of, as you mentioned, why we're looking into sewering in West Acton is the economic development opportunities, which would potentially lead to increased uses in that area, and so is there thought put into estimating how much that might impact the capacity? Do you do sort of modeling on that, or is it just sort of assumed that that would be covered under, sort of that excess capacity we would still have?
There are rules of thumb that you can use for changes. If as part of this West Acton work, you're also considering some zoning changes, for example, or density changes, there are rules of thumb to be applied, but they are rules of thumb. We find that it really boils down to the best evidence we have are the existing uses and how much water that they've used, with then a factor of safety, so to speak, we put on that. Because even with changes in use, not everybody uses all that water at the same time. Mm-hmm. So on that chart with all the peaks and valleys, they somewhat cancel each other out over the course of time. The more users you have, the less peaks and less valleys you have. But there are some rules of thumb or models that we can use.
To put in that, yeah, and then the other part to consider is just the school property in particular. They're looking at some capital projects related specifically to those 2 elementary schools that could become multiple elementary schools there. So I think taking that into consideration will be important as well. And then, I know the Kmart Plaza is sort of a big question mark as well, so it'd be interesting to kind of think more about what that might be. And then my other question was just related to, do you have any data on what's happened in the Flint Tuttle Spencer neighborhood since, about how many septic systems have been replaced in that neighborhood since 2008?
I do not have that data.
Okay. It would just be interesting to know,
I did have Cheryl Ball look into it. It's not many. I don't remember off the top of my head, but we can get you that.
Okay, so it sounds like that's still an issue in that area as well. Okay, well, thank you very much for your work on this.
Franny.
Yeah, I found it very overwhelming seeing all the work going through those many 180-page documents. And so I wanted to appreciate not only the work you've done, but the work of the people who have that worked on those committees for years. It was actually sort of sad, seeing comments at meetings made by Mary Michelman and Carol Hawley and other people that have passed that had played a role in all these discussions over the years. I had a few questions and little comments. It seems to me when you talk about the development, it's important that we get this under control, the decision about the sewers, before we discuss the planning, because the more if we have the question of whether we're going to have the sewers, it's going to be harder to plan the development in West Acton. So I'm really glad. I don't mind this speeded up timeline, because I think this is an important question for us to pose to the town and work out. Also, I just see a lot of positive developments happened in Kelly's Corner since we had the sewers put in. And that question that Katie was asking about use, when I was looking at water use and wondering about, for another issue in town for the Nagog Pond, I called someone in the state, and they were in conversation with our water district about whether the fact that they have sewering in their villages in Concord had anything to do with more water use. And the person in the state and our water district said that because people tend to watch their water more when they have sewers, it somehow seemed to, it didn't increase it as much as you would have expected. I don't know what you meant by rule of thumb, your rules of thumb, but what do the rules of thumb say happens to water use when you put in sewers? I just wanted to confirm that you had that same impression about water use in relation to when you put in sewers.
Yes, and I'll just speak from my personal experience, is that when you put in sewers for commercial development, there are water users that previously couldn't have existed on a septic system. Let's say a a hair salon or a restaurant that would have been limited. So we see more water users from a commercial standpoint. My personal experience is that we've seen less water usage from a residential standpoint, because now you're paying for your water coming into the house, but you're also paying for your sewer exiting the house, and it's changed the profile of your quarterly or monthly bill. Being one of those people personally with teenage children, I now pay attention to the amount of time that showers go on and those types of things that I assume I wouldn't have paid attention to as much if I was paying only a water bill. So that's my personal experience.
Okay. So I had a couple of tiny questions. I'll just ask them and then go offline. One is, if we do exceed the capacity, what is the next step in the town? So that's a sort of big question. I also have a question about, you talked about if we have an upcoming sewer and someone's selling their home, they might not want to put in a new septic system. Are the Title V requirements loosened for people who are selling their homes when a sewage system is under development? I had a question sort of for our town. I noticed a lot of the work was done by the health department, and now it seems to be done by engineering. And I didn't know if that's just because who tends to work on it. I mean, Doug was totally involved in the past. And is that a sort of just accidental change, or is that a conscious change, or is it not a change at all?
No, it wasn't an accident. I mean, you look at most models, sewers under Public Works, not under the Health Department. It just happened to be Doug was somebody who was interested in, and was willing to work on it back then, but it's a permanent move.
Okay. And the last questions, I just sort of wanted a big picture, having just come out from being buried in these long documents, and it's hard to get the big picture. If you were on an elevator and someone asked you, so that big feasibility study that was done in 2004, did it say it was advisable to sewer West Acton? And, you know, I saw these ones and twos, you know, a ranking of 1 for this east side of the tracks, a ranking of 2 for the other. I just want to know what the big picture is. Sometimes feasibility studies, it seems to me, they have miles and piles of paper and work done, and they're measuring things, and I don't see the exact question, you know, is it feasible, is it advisable? And I sort of would love a comment on that, about that study and the present study, if you had to sort of sum up the nutshell question and the nutshell answer.
All right.
That's all.
Taking them in order, I'll start and then I'll talk to Jack about the capacity matter. But in recent years, the Massachusetts DEP has gotten out of the business of day-to-day management of wastewater capacity. They've handed that back to their communities to manage your own wastewater capacity. So they look for a plan once you've achieved 80% of your wastewater treatment facilities capacity on a daily basis. So for round numbers, if you're a 300,000 gallon per day facility, you're at 299, but we'll make the math easy. When you achieve 80% of that number, which you're not near, they would look for a plan or a report about what you're going to do to use and cap the remaining 20% or expand your facility. So that's their process.
I guess my question is there room for expansion of the facility in Acton?
Yep. The treatment facility consists of 2 components. The treatment process and then the groundwater discharge system. So the treatment process in the building and tanks were designed with that future capacity in mind. So adding capacity there is a much simpler thing. It might be a matter of upsizing pumps, changing out some equipment, that type of thing. On the groundwater discharge, the state has approved the size of the fields that are there. I don't think they can be expanded directly, but there are other options of where you can discharge. I think to the northwest of the plant might be a viable option. and as well as looking at other properties. But a lot of the groundwater discharge is just a matter of footprint and type of soils and proximity to other resource areas.
So your next step for, if capacity becomes an issue or you wish to go above 299, would be some additional rapid infiltration beds. That open area you see at the intersection of High and Adams. You wouldn't see any changes to the building. Some things would happen inside the building, but you wouldn't see any changes outside of the building. The building was designed for 500,000 gallons per day. Those rapid infiltration beds are your bottleneck at 300,000 gallons per day. Your next question is actually fairly easy, that there is a Title V waiver process that exists if sewers are coming in the near future that the Board of Health and Department of Health can manage. It does come with strings attached. You must then connect in within a certain period of time after sewers are available. And if you do have a truly failing septic system, you have to do your best to mitigate the fact that you may have a public health and safety issue or a personal health and safety issue if you have raw wastewater on your property. But there is a waiver process, and the town used that waiver process extensively in the Middle Fort Pond Brook Sewer Project, such that the town had all of their initial users lined up on day one to generate some flow and revenue very quickly out of the gates. I feel that Mr. Halley used that process as a tool, and he used it very well in the first project. Steve answered the question quite finely. We deal with public health and safety and septic issues with health departments, and then it quickly moves over to engineering and DPW for sewers. And then in a big picture, if I was in the elevator riding out of here, I would say that the Acton Comprehensive Wastewater Management Plan laid out a nice 30-year plan that the town jumped right on the areas of highest need along the Middle Fort Pond Brook, along School Street, along Main Street, in South Acton Center. But areas were also identified along High Street, in Spencer Tuttle Flint, along West Acton Center, and then the next one down the road was Indian Village, where sewers really may be a viable solution for wastewater issues. What those plans don't do is drive a timeline. I'm not telling you that you must do one a year for 20 years. They more set you as directionally correct, and then it's up to the local body to decide if it is truly feasible. Because feasibility is not just engineering feasibility, it's dollars and cents, it's cultural feasibility, it's leading in the other factors that define your community, like development you're trying to foster or development you're trying to prevent. So it's a roadmap for the engineering piece. The community can then make the decision on all of the other qualitative components to using that plan.
One tiny question I forgot to ask. Why isn't it going down Windsor, like toward the Housing Authority? It seemed like that would be a place.
That's a great question. In our concept, we didn't go down Windsor or Kinsley, I think it is. However, those are the types of discussions we want to open up to decide, is it a topography-based matter, is it not? Those are the exact types of discussions that really make a true, robust public educational and awareness program.
Jin-Sung?
All right, so I guess thank you for doing all this work. I, like Franny, was buried in the documents, and it's been good to clarify sort of some of the scope of what I've been looking at, and I definitely need to go back and read a lot of those again, sort of having a better understanding of what is talking about where. But I guess for now, I think that I'm a little bit on the opposite side of Franny, in the sense that I think that we should make sure that we take our time and do our outreach properly. Given the amount of impact that this is going to have on the residents and businesses in the area, I think it's important for us to make sure that we get good feedback from them as well as the rest of the town, and really make sure that we go through and dot all our I's and cross all our T's. I guess the other thing that I wanted to to ask you about, you know, sort of, you had a conceptual plan, and it was mentioned that, you know, I don't know about Kinsey Street or Windsor or some of the other things. What areas would be open for sewer access in terms of what you could do, and what maybe might limit sewer access as far as topography or, you know, existing formations of wetlands or things of that nature? You know, if we could get an understanding of what the potential areas for sewer development are, and, you know, where, you know, you think it would be recommended for us to put sewers, as well as where it wouldn't be recommended and why those areas aren't recommended. I think, though, that would be useful information to have. Thank you.
Do you want to use laser pointer and talk about that? Go back to this. Go back to that side.
Generally speaking, in our current project area, we looked at topography as topography being, we can pick up those areas with gravity sewers to the pump station locations identified on this map. For most of the areas, if you wanted to go further down a street, it's possible in some respect. There are different ways that you can build the sewer system to pick up more properties. Probably the biggest limiting factor here is right by the A on Arlington Street, where that would be an additional stream crossing to go in that direction. So typically we wouldn't recommend picking up one home and have to do a stream crossing. The cost benefit just isn't there. But in other directions, it's possible. And I'm not saying you can't cross the stream. You can do it, but typically we'd want to pick up a sufficient number of properties to do that. So going down Windsor is possible, extending further down on Central Ave, or going further west on Mass Ave is possible. But as the topography goes against us, it drives our sewer deeper and costs go up. So this was that happy medium of getting the core area while, I guess, minimizing some of those costs.
Okay, and you said that there was sort of like a safety margin that you built in for water usage. What is that safety margin?
We're using a factor of 2, so people's average daily water use over a year multiplied by 2.
Okay, thanks. I was actually surprised to see this level of detail, because I had always heard this referred to as a feasibility study. It turns out that was done in 2008, I guess. One question I have is, if you did the comprehensive wastewater resources management plan in 2006 and the feasibility study in 2008, I know, I'm not a scientist, I know nothing about this, but there has been talk that it's more environmentally friendly to put the water back in the ground rather than transport it all the way across town and put it in the river eventually, I guess. I think the MWRA or whoever deals with all those sewage that goes to Deer Island is talking about treatment plants, small treatment plants, rather than pumping everything to Deer Island. I mean, has any of that theory changed since, and is that feasible to have small treatment plants rather than build the whole sewer system in West Acton?
I would describe it as there are several different philosophies as to what's best for groundwater. There certainly has been a push to decentralize large regional wastewater treatment facilities like the MWRA, where you are transferring water out of a basin, out of a river system into a new basin, to try to keep water local. There has been a push for innovative alternatives or decentralized small wastewater treatment facilities that keep treated wastewater immediately local. What I've seen in my experience in 20 years is the pendulum goes back and forth between the two, from a more cost-effective centralized approach to a less cost-effective but water stays regionally and groundwater supplies are treated and replenished approach. And it's really where on that spectrum the community would like to be drives the ultimate decision. In Acton's case, the Middle Fort Pond Brook Sewer District, I would be very careful in comparing that to the MWRA that takes the water from the Quabbin Reservoir in Western Mass and brings it over a tremendous distance. But we've experienced both styles. Jack and I are recently looking to put our third small wastewater treatment facility in a community that's looking to keep their wastewater treated, their groundwater very local. 3 smaller plants, 50,000 gallons per day, for example, in one community. It's a choice on a spectrum.
It sounds like that's a more expensive option in the long run, to have the treatment plants rather than the centralized collection.
It is from a dollars and cents standpoint. It definitely is.
And this is kind of not related to this, but we put the treated wastewater into the fields, and I assume that eventually seeps through the fields into the river. Is that what happens?
It seeps through the field into the ground, and then eventually will reach the river. Yes.
But by the time our wastewater reaches the river, it's pretty free of phosphorus and clean, discharging into the river, whereas what I was reading in your report, Maynard and all the towns upriver are dumping pretty toxic wastewater into the river. Is that still true today?
I don't know if I could, I won't comment on toxic wastewater by others in the river. I will say that I believe Acton's treatment discharge on many occasions has been cleaner than the water in the river, because we sample that discharge every day. We sample the river monthly. But in the last 20 years, the Sudbury, the Assabet, and the Concord River water quality have all improved significantly because of the implementation of different wastewater treatment technologies and different phosphorus management technologies, even roadway runoff. But your effluent is incredibly clean in Acton. We're very proud of it, and at times it is cleaner than the river, which it eventually blends with.
Well, that's good to hear. You talk about a gravity system, which I guess that answered one of my questions. What kind of drove this outline of where the sewer would be? But I thought there was also some discussion. Well, first of all, you have pumping stations, so does the gravity go to the pumping station, and the pumping station then has to move it along? And there was some discussion about force mains or something. Can you explain that?
Sure. I oversimplified a little bit on this figure, and we don't have a legend on it, but if there were a legend, the blue lines are the gravity sewers. And you'll see that, if you can see the small arrows, they flow to a pumping station. The pumping station pumps via the green line to typically another gravity sewer. It flows along the way. On Arlington Street is the primary pump station that would convey flow all the way over to Prospect Street. So that's a green line, a force main all the way over. The red line is a low pressure sewer system, and that's a small diameter pipe where each house would have a small grinder pump that pumps into that line. So there are essentially 2 parallel lines on Massachusetts Ave that discharge into the existing system.
I would add that in New England and in Acton, there's plenty of ups and downs. So the sewer system is designed for the wastewater to flow to a localized low point, where then it's pumped to the top of the next hill, and then it flows down again to relay it out. You try to minimize the number of pump stations that you need, because that's a fixed cost. So you strategize around what are the best low points. But when you don't have a pump station, suddenly your sewers start to get deeper and deeper and deeper and deeper, and they really become cost ineffective, excuse me, to install those really deep sewers. So in this model, we have 2 pump stations, and then we've added one in for the schools as well, because of what we anticipate to be their topography, but that will be discussed if they are part of the program.
Okay, so that's a force main, if it's pumped, is that a force main versus
Correct.
the low impact? So these grinders, I've heard rumors that they're tough to maintain and they cause a lot of problems. Is that up to the homeowners to maintain those? That's not part of the district system?
I will check. I do not believe it's part of the town's district. In many of the communities that we've done and managed several hundred in Gloucester. We've done them in other communities where they're basically an appliance that allow the wastewater from my house to be pumped up and out. They're buried in the yard, so it looks like basically the cover of, almost a round trash barrel cover on the ground. They've got typically 50 or 60 gallons of storage. And in my experience, they have done very well if you treat them properly, like those who may have a garbage disposal know that a garbage disposal isn't going to macerate everything that you have. You have to treat it properly. The sewer grinder pumps are much the same.
Okay. Sewer betterment units, I assume a single residential home is one unit. Is that accurate?
That is a model.
So what
that's
about
been
a commercial property like the sub shop? Is that just one, too?
That is a model that would need to be determined with how many seats are in the sub shop, for example. What else is happening? You are right. Under Acton's model, a single-family residential home with 3 or 4 bedrooms is one SBU. Then when you get to 2 families or 3 families or a condo, it's a very easy conversion. When you get to commercial uses or institutional uses or any non-residential uses, there's a little bit of an art to trying to make it into an apples-to-apples comparison.
But that's defined in Acton's regulations, is that, or it was bylaw or whatever?
The structure is defined in Acton's regulation, and then there's some precedent that has been set already in the Middle Fort Pond Brook sewer project.
Okay. I had some questions about the capacity. You've got, I mean, in dealing with this water use issue that we've been dealing with, I've learned a lot. One is the average daily water use is just that. It's an average over a year. You can exceed that as long as your yearly average is below that. Is that true of the sewer use also? Or if you go, up to the maximum one day of the year, is that determines your usage for that year? Your daily usage? If one day is up to, we've got, 250,000 gallons in March of 10. Was that the yearly usage for 2010?
So I'll go back to that figure. The blue lines represent the average flow on a weekly basis. So looking at each week, the purple dots are the highest flow day of the year. The permit is compared, the red line is compared to those purple dots. So you can see for the duration, we're well under that line with the exception of 2010, that spring wet weather event, which was typically categorized as the 100-year storm. So we compare your average daily flow. If you look at the oscillations in the blue line and you go to the left, you'll see that it's about 130,000 gallons per day at the plant. So everybody's water use is up and down, and what you see in this figure is everybody doesn't use their peak amount of water on the same day. So that's why you have a lot of those fluctuations. I think that's answering your question, but we're looking at the gap between the highest flow day of the year and the permit limit, and that's the available capacity.
So then my question is, I guess I need to understand the numbers. If you have a 300,000 gallons per day, and you're using 130,000, how does that only leave you 68,000?
Yep. So the 130,000 is your average day. And when you look at the peak of all of those flows, we looked at the real peaks. And the purple dashed line, there are 3 dots. And we connected those dots, and they're very consistent. with the exception of that 100-year storm day. And those are compared to your permit limit. So your permit limit is on a maximum day. So on any given day, you should not exceed that flow. The average flow, by definition, half the time you're higher than it and half the time you're lower than it. So the permit limit on typical groundwater discharge facilities are on a maximum day basis.
That's why I bring Jack. I would have said your permit has two numbers, an average and a peak, and you have to balance those two when you're allocating available capacity. Jack's work here is the backup to justifying that balance.
Okay, thanks very much. I don't have any further questions, and yeah, Janet?
Yeah, I have a few random questions that just came up. First of all, and again, I'll go through them and then you can answer. What are there criteria for requiring that somebody, once the sewer line is installed, requiring that a person hook up? Is that based on the health department's determination that the existing septic system is failing and the person has to take measures to hook up to the sewer? Because I know that sometimes people don't hook up right away. They have the option, but they may not take it right away. For example, some of the people who in West Acton, in the businesses, they've installed septic systems at big expense, and I don't know if they may be eager to move to sewering, because it obviously, if you have a restaurant, it may ease a lot of the burden of worrying about whether you're exceeding your capacity. But that's one question. And then the schools are in the process of developing a capital plan, including for the grammar school buildings in West Acton that are on Arlington, and I'm just wondering if we would be able to develop a plan, assuming that this goes forward, that would kind of delay kind of the detailed configuration for the grammar schools until the plan is sort of clearer. There's financing. I mean, the school district is in the process of getting in line for potential state funding for some sort of capital project, and I think that one of those grammar schools on Arlington or just off of it is high on the list of priorities, so it's likely to be addressed sooner rather than later. But this is a multi-year process to get the project out of sort of conceptual and into design and then actually getting constructed. So I'm wondering, I think they're an obvious target, or they're an obvious need, high need place. I'm just wondering how much flexibility we have in sort of not designing a hookup for them until their own plans about what kind of building they're going to have or buildings they're going to have and where they're going to be, is sort of a little clear. So that's one sort of observation and question. On the issue of smaller scale treatment plants, package plants and stuff, I think that you or the people who are handling public outreach need to be prepared for some pushback. Just people arguing that you need to have you can have a facility that treats a neighborhood and that sort of thing. Of course, the problem with that is you need to have land for a facility, which probably could be an issue for some neighborhoods. And then my last question has to do with whether treatment technology now is able to take out pharmaceuticals from the wastewater, because I know that has been a concern for people, and I wasn't sure if the technology existed now that you could take pharmaceuticals out of the wastewater before it goes through the filtration fields and then eventually back into the ground. And I don't know enough about it to know whether all of those things come out in the process of infiltrating the ground. But obviously there's a concern that people will end up with water at some point that has pharmaceuticals that they did not themselves take. And obviously there's probably a concern about impact on wildlife, or if they somehow sort of take it in some fashion. But I just was wondering, because that was an issue that I've heard has not, where the technology doesn't yet exist. So
Okay, we'll take those in order. In a general sense, most of our clients do not have a mandatory connection requirement for sewer for those who are adjacent to the new sewer, unless they are on a waiver for a septic system. Unless they have an existing septic system variance or waiver, or if there's a change in use to the property, that we've seen many clients use it as a triggering event to connect onto the sewer and eliminate the septic system. In most cases, we've found that that change of use is taking advantage of the sewer system. It's the sewer driving the change in use. We do have clients who incent early connections by maybe waiving part of a connection fee in the first year after the sewers are in, because the goal of putting these sewers in are to get people to use them. So there are various incentive programs based upon connection time. And I haven't seen any rules of thumb on what that incentive is, but we've seen the various programs. We are certainly well aware on the second question that the schools are developing the capital plan. And from an engineering standpoint, we will be careful to have open discussions about how do we design in capacity for them. However, it rolls directly to the cost impact question, almost to the same model of supersizing that the town had previously used, to make sure that if there's an incremental increase in cost for somebody we think is coming down the road, the general users don't pay that incremental increase. We find a way to isolate it for those future users if it happens to be the school. I'll lean on Jack, but from a technical standpoint, if the schools need their own pump station, that does give us an advantage for isolating and capturing their flow. Would you agree with that?
Yep. It would definitely be the size of their station. And when we want to plan for capacity or a larger capacity in use, when we build the sewer pipes in the ground, as Joe was referencing the supersizing, we put it in we do a calculation for the build out of the parcels. So we would be looking at that number when we size the pipe of what we put in the ground. So typically it's things like a pump station that would need, I guess, a potential increase in capacity and or say the overall treatment capacity of the plant. So that 26,000 number could go up. But you typically don't want to be reinstalling a sewer pipe 5 years later. You make sure it's got the adequate capacity.
We agree we'll be ready for an appropriate discussion about decentralized treatment plants and what that might mean. The school concept speaks very well because the Gates and Douglas School may exceed the threshold, and part of their capital thinking may be that they need their own treatment plant in that area. So as these paths have a chance to overlap, but we will be ready for that discussion. And pharmaceuticals are what the industry calls pharmaceutical and personal care products, or constituents of concern come up repeatedly in every presentation that we do. There are wastewater treatment technologies that remove pharmaceutical and personal care products as a byproduct of what they're focusing on. The DEP doesn't regulate pharmaceutical and personal care products. So treatment plants focus on nitrogen, phosphorus, suspended solids, BOD. But along for the ride comes a number of pharmaceutical and personal care products. They're removed in the sludge. There's a number of studies regarding how much pharmaceutical and personal care products are removed. However, because we're not designing or targeting pharmaceutical and personal care products, they're a secondary byproduct of the treatment process that's permitted around other constituents. These are just studies. I absolutely do know and have testified many times that wastewater treatment facilities remove more pharmaceutical and personal care products than septic systems ever will. So if pharmaceutical and personal care products in groundwater is a concern, wastewater treatment facilities are the better option for their removal.
Thank you very much.
Franny.
I wanted to answer one of Janet's questions. I talked to at least 3 business owners or landlords in West Acton, and they were talking about the advantages to them of more seating, more food production, and specifically the WAVE project. I said, you already put in a big plant. How would you, a septic system, how would you feel? And he said in a second he would sign on.
All right, let me just ask what you're really looking for tonight. If you were to point toward the Springtown meeting, what do you consider an adequate timeline to complete the community outreach that you need to do to educate the citizens about this issue?
We would recommend basically a monthly meeting or outreach activity, and then a communication every 2 weeks for awareness. Both general communications, but targeted, well, I'll say it 2 ways. Certainly general communications, because everybody can come to town meeting and vote, but a targeted campaign for those people who might be the 180 or 200 parcels within consideration. So this board can hear those people who might want to be in or might want to be out. So there can be an educational opportunity about what it means to be in at the concept level and what it means to be out at the concept level. One of the challenges we always struggle through is that people want definitive numbers and information. However, not knowing who's in and who's out, we do the best to give you the reasonable numbers based upon where we are in the process. So we tend to bracket numbers, a range of betterments that would be targeted, for example, in the process. But an open dialogue townwide, and then a very specific communication to the people who are on or adjacent to the yellow. The other component, when the town meeting voted down the design of the Spencer Tuttle Flint, I was at that town meeting, and there was a very clear ask about, can the people who are in the district stand up and tell us if you want to be in the district? And although the moderator understandably had concerns about that being appropriate for town meeting process, I would recommend some type of survey or some type of approach to try to get a quantifiable return about people's desire to be in or desire to be out based upon that subset, based upon the 180 or 200. That the other town meeting members who may not live in this area or be aware of this can rely on. They're voting on what someone else might receive.
Well, let's see. The town meeting's not that far away, actually. 5 months, 4 months, really. January, February, March, and December. So if we were to make a decision to move forward by January 1st, is 3 months, in your experience, enough time to go through that process?
3 months will be aggressive. There's no doubt about that.
Okay.
4 months would certainly give us a little more elbow room. However, we are sensitive to the holiday season and trying to get people's attention over the next month. Okay.
Thank you. No further questions from the board. We'll open it to citizens.
Unfortunately, all the stuff that you had to read, I had already read because I was on the Sewer Action Committee and the CWMRP and all that kind of stuff. So I knew what was said. I will also say that we'll never get it for town meeting. You'll never be ready for town meeting because you do not know what the schools are going to do. And you cannot go forward for a project like this when the schools are up in the air. And so it will be like beating your head against the wall. This is not, I mean, I've been on these committees so many times. This is not the way to go. I'm sorry. I think that you should appoint a group of people to go forward and help and get information from these guys, and then they disseminate it to the rest of the town. One of the things that you have to do is you have to make sure, as he said, a survey. I know that the people at the top of Tuttle Road don't want it. The people at the bottom of Tuttle Road do want it, and the people in Flint Road would like it. When we were doing when we were doing that area, you were doing directional drilling. You weren't doing sewer drilling. Are you still going to do directional drilling in that area? Are you going to do deep drilling?
You're talking about the Spencer Total Flats area? We haven't looked at that recently, but there were options on the table for the gravity sewers or the low-pressure sewer design.
Well, it makes a big difference for the cost, not only for the town, but for the individuals. I mean, it's a considerable difference in the cost. So I just don't think there's enough time for this project to go forward for town meeting. Fall, perhaps, a lovely fall town meeting when it's the only thing there might be nice. But there's just not enough time, I'm sorry. Because you do have to get a constituency behind you, not only for the people who are in the affected areas, but the people who are outside the area and will see some sort of benefit to the town to see West Acton Center sewered and see a direct benefit to them to have that done. But that can't be done until you know exactly what the schools are going to do the planning for the schools. And since we don't know, unfortunately, I think we're going to have to wait a bit for the schools to come forward.
Thank you, Ann. I would just say that we certainly have not discussed the fall town meeting at all, but the schools are talking about calling a fall town meeting or asking us to call a fall town meeting to get an approval to file an application with the Mass School Building Authority.
Peter, it's not to file an application with them. They filed an application with the MSBA. It would be related to getting design funds from the town. Design funds would be related to actual funding.
Getting the town to fund the design so they can access the state school building. Okay.
Right, it's not yet. They've filed an application.
But anyway, they talked about a town meeting to deal with the school building issue, so.
Well, they cannot...
And you got to do it in the mic.
They cannot build without sewers. They're already in the floodplain. I mean, they cannot continue in the same manner that they are. They cannot continue with septic systems. The state won't let them. So they're going to have to do something more aggressive, or I should say, they're going to have to do a better system than what they have now. And the better system, of course, would be something that we come up with here. But we really don't know, we don't even know where the buildings are going to go, or where they're going to, if they're going to tear down the old ones and build a new one. I mean, we just don't know anything. So it's just too much. There are too many questions before we embark on something like this, I think. But I also think that we should get some citizen input, a citizen group to do some of the outreach and that sort of nonsense.
Are you volunteering, Ann?
Sure.
Relative to a committee, I hope that there's a range of opinions on that board, and it's not just a sales committee. I have some questions. First of all, how many SBUs does the Acton Boxborough Regional High School and the junior high school complex, how many SBUs are currently assigned to that property?
That I do not know.
Okay, so that's one question. I know, I'm talking to the people who've done the design, so I want to understand what they understand. And the mall, the West Acton Mall, how many gallons per day are they currently at?
That I do not know. We didn't bring specific parcel information tonight. We can get that information.
It might have been in the document that was in the packet. I just couldn't read it because it was small letters and I couldn't tell what the different columns were. It might be there already. The wetlands along Mass Ave, how are they treated? Because if a property is quote-unquote unbuildable because of wetlands or whatever, do they get still assigned one SBU? Or do they?
That has not been Acton's model to date. That is only buildable, developed or developable parcels.
Okay, so all of
that receive an SBU.
So all of those yellow parcels are not really in the parcels that would apply to the cost figures? Is that what I'm
All
understanding?
of the yellow parcels are parcels that abut the sewer system. There
Oh,
hasn't-
I see. Okay, so we don't know if they would be considered in the actual eventual cost figures. They
Correct.
may be bypassed or whatever. Okay, thank you. And then the municipal properties. So, for example, on the top of Wright Hill, that was purchased for conservation land, and yet you show it as, so again, it's just abutting. It may be a zero cost.
That will be up to Acton. In the Middle Fort Pond Brook Sewer Project, Acton did make a contribution for the municipal properties that were connected, or that touched as part of their fair share contribution for sewer costs, but that would be a decision to be made as part of the financing package.
Okay, so rough figures, and I don't know if you've done these or not, but I was also involved in the CWRMP study project. I was actually got a heads up from Carol Hawley on that, and I'll get to some of my comments in a moment on that. It looks to me like a third of the cost would be picked up by residents, a third of the cost would be picked up by the schools and potentially municipal, and then another third of the cost would go to commercial. Is that what I'm looking at?
I don't know. I haven't broken it down in that
Okay,
level of detail, so I would like to be careful not to
Sure,
speak
because
about that.
if you take rough numbers, 10 million, and divide it by 200 parcels, you get about $50,000 a parcel, right? So if, at least when we were looking at this sewer then, we were talking about how 30,000 or 40,000.
I'd like to be very clear, though. It's not 10 million divided by 200 parcels. These parcels are all significantly different. Some parcels are 1/8 of an acre. Some parcels are 5 acres. That's not the way that betterments are calculated.
Yes, okay, so while I was sitting there, I was going through the numbers of the residential parcels and figuring out how many SBUs, if one residential parcel would get one SBU, and then how many would be left over for the commercial to pick up, and it looked to me like it was in the order of $60,000 or $70,000 per commercial parcel. So I'll set that aside. That was basically, I got my question answered. So now I want to get to who was behind this, because and the goals, this didn't even make the list. It was in the after-mentioned notes that one or two people had mentioned it as a priority. It was like 1 or 2 points, as opposed to the stuff on the list was much higher. People can take a look at those goals themselves if you're wondering what I'm talking about. And then relative to the need, Carol Hawley, I got a call from her, and rest in peace, Carol, we miss you. She said to me, you know, they're drawing needs areas on a map that don't technically need any help. They're drawing them for economic development purposes. And I said, nah, that can't be, because the numbers will show where it's needed. She goes, no, you better get down there and watch this. And I did. I went down there and I watched folks with a vested political or economic interest, drawing on a map. And so when we went to the technical hearing, where we had the engineers from your company, we specifically asked them, is there an actual technical need? And we had people like Matt Liebman, who have an engineering background, and Ron Beck. A lot of these folks actually understand these numbers, and your folks admitted that there was no actual technical need. And so I would like to make sure that whatever happens, that we are upfront with people right up at the beginning about what the CWRMP said and what it didn't say. So I want to make sure that we're clear about that right at the beginning. And then I also want to be careful about the Kelly's Corner need, because if we get what we collectively want, I think we have an idea of what that is. It's mostly commercial, and it's small shops, restaurants, and things that use a lot of water. And so I hope that we are careful about what we decide that Kelly's Corner needs. And I just also want to make a comment about the pharma treatment. I believe that as soon as they're going to be able to do it at that end, they're going to be able to do it at the water district end. So we don't necessarily have to put in sewers to protect ourselves from pharmaceuticals. The last thing is relative to the mandate and the need. Also, I think we need that technical work done so that we understand that, because when we first put the first sewer in, the town meeting day, we got a letter from the state saying that we didn't actually need these sewers, the Gottlieb letter that was not given to town meeting, and we have the history on that, how that information was not given to the voters.
There were poopies running down River Street, and you don't think we needed them?
I'm just saying that the Gottlieb letter was denied from town meeting.
We're not, you're talking about the Fort Pond Middlebrook. There were poopies running down.
Can you address the board, please?
Excuse me. there were poopies running down River Street. The thing was really needed. There were over 9 waivers in a very small area in the historic district for, on River Street, and I don't know, about 3 or 4 more on School Street. The thing was really very necessary. And yes, Tara, we want to do economic development in West Acton Center.
Well, yes, I understand there's a few people that really want it. I also talked to people, and they've said, no, they don't want it. So, but either way, I think that it's important to have the actual information out because, yes, I agree that there was a small group of people that really needed the sewers, but what they said is that we didn't need the supersizing, we didn't need the scope of what we were trying to do. So please, let's just get the information on the table early so that people don't feel like they're not getting the information. And my goal is so that people can trust government as opposed to getting sort of a sales job. So thank you very much.
Hi, Doug Tyndall, Old Village Road. I want to switch hats a couple of times here, but I was chair of the Economic Development Committee when the committee sat down and went through the initiatives that we felt were appropriate. And West Acton Village, the core, for commercial development purposes, seemed like a logical thing to do. It's the only walkable village that we already have. And a comprehensive plan of dealing with sewage problems and parking was the logjam. And if we could break that, we would do it. I must say that at the time we were not thinking about a really large-scale plan to do lots of areas of West Acton. What we were talking about specifically was the economic development opportunity that exists in the village. And so we passed that along saying that we supported it, and that's as far as we went. As far as the sequencing of this thing is concerned, if I put on a FinCom hat, one of the things that we said at the tri-board meeting was that the effort now is to try and think long-term, to think about planning for capital needs in a variety of areas. And I think that this project, substantial as it is likely to run into a very tense competition with the needs that we've identified in the town facilities and in the schools facilities for capital improvement. In the schools, we're talking about wholesale replacements. In the town, there's things like fire stations and so on. So I would urge that in keeping with what we said at the tri-board meeting, that we sequence this very carefully, that we understand that this needs to be weighed in the balance in timing a wide variety of complicated capital needs that the town has and will have over the next 20 years. Thank you.
Okay, I guess I'll open it to the board for discussion about where we go from here. I'll just note that our second goal short-term goal for fiscal year 17 was to create a West Acton Development Committee, including sewer, which has not happened yet, but that was a goal. Yes, Janet.
I think when I was reading all this and I saw the proposed timeline in spring town meeting next year, I did have the same reaction that Ann and I guess Ching Sung had, that maybe this is kind of an ambitious schedule for, especially when you have to do a public outreach, and especially in my case, being mindful of what happened the last time. I would like to allow us a little more time to go through the process and get everybody informed and get all the questions answered, all the information out there. So I think maybe it might be more realistic for us to look at next fall as opposed to spring town meeting, because we have a lot of other issues to deal with, and this is a big chunk to grapple with in the next just few months. I think that if we allow more time, it will end up with I hope, better result, because I do think that there are people in the West Acton, the village area, who would like sewering, and I think you don't want to have it fail again because we're sort of rushing. And I do think that we need to, much as we hate to organize more committees, I do think we need to have a committee start working on this, and we could start with some of the folks who are already familiar with all of the sewering, the the system and all the terminology and all that stuff, if they're interested, which some of them I think might be. One has already indicated she'd be willing to be roped into doing it again, but organize a committee to start kind of digging into things and figuring out what it is that we should do, work with Woodward and Curran about just the sequencing of the informational process. And, you know, what kinds of issues does Woodward and Curran or their public outreach experts or somebody need to address in order to, you know, not have reservations, not have any questions still existing at town meeting if and when we get there. So that's all I have to say.
Okay, let me just ask quickly another question of Woodward and Curran. Being a member of the Fort Pond Brook Sewer District, I'm aware that the users of the district pay for all the costs as opposed to spreading it all over town. That was a town meeting vote early on, I think. And you have these, so we would, I think, have to assume that that would be what the town would decide to do with any new sewer district. But you have these options under discussion for funding. Did we float bonds also for the Fort Pond Brook Sewer District? I'm assuming bonding is another source of funding, right?
That is correct. Portions of the Middle Fort Pond Brook were bonded over 20 years because they were portions that were ineligible for SRF funding. There was an archaeological study, for example, as part of that project. That was paid for by a bond.
SRF being?
A state revolving fund.
Oh, okay.
It's a low-interest loan paid back over 30 years.
So those are available for 100% of the construction costs of a sewer district? Is that
For
what you're
100% of
okay.
construction costs and police detail costs and construction phase oversight.
Okay.
The design and any easements that you need to take and pay for are not eligible for SRF funding.
Okay. And that's a 2% rate?
That's a 2%, yes.
Okay, thank you. Franny?
Yeah, I want to thank people who shared, especially with Ann's experience on these committees. I take that. I like the idea of moving fast, but not that fast. So I do agree that a fall town meeting at the earliest would be a time that would give us time to speak out. And I also appreciate Tara's desire for things to be transparent and for people to have all the information they need. And so I look forward to a really clear outreach process. And I have a question about the schools, because I think Doug's right, so I really appreciate all of you, about really working in concert. Is it possible to put in a pump and not know the design of a school? If you just know that there's going to be something there, is it possible to not know exactly where the pipe will originally start, but still have a pump in the area of the schools as part of the plan that you're going forward with?
We can make reasonable assumptions as to where they will connect in, because they will also be driven by topography and the desire to put in the least costly site work.
Okay.
We may also find if they are going for MSBA design money in the fall, my experience is the Mass School Building Authority does not pay for site work or treatment plants, so they may have had to have made their decision about going sewer, going septic, or having an on-site wastewater treatment facility. If we flange up with them for the fall, that timing may work fairly well with the school's timeline, as we currently understand it.
Okay. But I do like the idea of getting going. I like including the economic development process in there. I have heard people who were opposed to the Flint-Tuttle one and say that they would be in favor of a West Acton sewering. So that was encouraging to me. So anyway, if there's a consensus forming to move forward and try to take this up in the fall, I would be for that. And I'm really looking forward to working with a committee to include, because our goal was West Acton development, including sewers, because we wanted to have that as part of the plan, but look at the other parts of economic development in addition. But I think that our focus right now should be the sewers, so that as we're developing, we know what we're working with.
Katie.
Thanks, Peter. I agree with Janet and Franny that I think we should work towards probably closer to a fall timeline, and I agree with Janet that the next step I think that we should take as a board is putting together a committee, so I'm hoping somebody's willing to draft sort of a proposed committee charge and membership, and I think that's probably the next concrete step that we should take to move forward. So that would be my recommendation tonight, is that while I appreciate the willingness for an aggressive timeline, I think, you know, we often get one shot at these things, or it sits for a number of years if something fails, so we want to make sure we do it right this time. So I think we need to have a longer timeline and put together a committee now. So that would be my recommendation for tonight.
Chin-Sung?
I can get behind that. I mean, I think that the most important thing that we do tonight is to start the public outreach process. I do actually think that it's very important that we talk to not only sort of the people that are on the yellow parcels, right, the people who might be directly impacted by this project, but even, you know, going out beyond those parcels to, you know, nearby people, and, you know, how this project might affect them, because, you know, obviously smaller things like, you know, their own access, as well as the change in the neighborhoods, as well as, you know, direct visible impacts like construction, road work, that kind of thing, you know, which will have impacts on them, as well as, you know, maybe potentially sewer line extensions later that would include them, depending on where they are and sort of the various factors that might be associated with those things. So I don't think we should limit our scope to just you know, the so-called directly affected properties in yellow. And I think that the most important part of this is to solicit public feedback, both from, you know, business owners who might be interested in expanding, you know, their operations, particularly in West Acton Center, as well as residents who might feel that, you know, the sewer development might positively or negatively impact their community. And so I think that, you know, a fall town meeting is good, you know, if we can complete it by then, but I think it's important that we don't rush this process. The most important thing that we can do right now is make sure that we get all of the residents in this area in West Acton on the same page, and in terms of their understanding of what this project would entail, what the costs might be, what the impact on their community might be, and let them make the decision for themselves whether or not this is something they want. I'm absolutely in favor of the town of Acton putting this forward as an option, you know, because it would be something that I think government should be doing. But ultimately, I want to make sure that we give the residents and the business owners in this area the ability to decide their own future with relation to the sewer project.
I agree with the general consensus. It seems to me the best way to approach it is to put together a committee, work with Woodward and Curran to put together surveys, get information out to the community, hold the community meetings. The process is going to make or break this project, and so obviously we need to ensure that that happens appropriately. So I don't know if we need to take a vote. We've already set a goal of. Does anyone think we need a motion for this? We set a goal to put this committee together, and it seems to me that's probably the appropriate committee to work with the engineers and the town staff to explore these options and do the outreach.
Peter, I don't think we need a motion. I think somebody here needs to volunteer, and I'm not volunteering because I've taken on a number of things recently, so I think somebody else here needs to volunteer to put together a draft charge and, you know, membership and bring it to a future meeting to discuss.
Well, Selectman Osmond was the liaison, or the selectman assigned to that particular goal, so I'm assuming that...
I did talk to Doug Halley about the makeup of a committee, what he saw as a good makeup. A lot of I don't know if you want to hear it. He mentioned somebody from the Selectmen, from the Finance Committee, from the School Committee, from the Business Community, Historical Commission, Planning, Conservation Committee, EDC, at-large members. Yeah, so.
Franny, I think you need to do both a membership and a charge for the committee.
Oh,
So I
yes.
think it would be helpful to draft that and bring it to, you know, probably our next meeting or second meeting in December to discuss as an actual.
I could do that.
action.
Yeah. I wanted to be clear that the charge really was focusing on, I mean, we listed two things. I just would like to hear confirmation that we're including both the sewering and the Economic Development Committee in this committee. That's what our goal was.
I agree with that.
Okay.
I mean, I think we have an Economic Development Committee, and I think that they can obviously participate in this, but I think that it's the bigger issue is doing outreach about the proposed sewering of West Acton, which is it's a very complicated process. I think, yeah, if you have an EDC rep in this committee, that will take care of that, but I think that it really is, the focus is on doing the outreach about sewering, because that in turn is going to support economic development, but I think it's more, yeah.
I have a question about that then, because sewering seems like one step in that can contribute to the economic development issues in West Acton. There are other things. So what do we want the charge of this, I mean, well, obviously we'll bring it, but as I'm developing the charge, do we want it to focus on sewering? I mean, do you want to do this stepwise? Just get a committee to work on the outreach about the sewering for now, or do you want it to be as big as the goal said?
Let me give my thoughts on that. It would seem to me that any discussion of sewers might also raise economic development issues. The zoning bylaw for the village districts, I think, was put together in the mid-90s. There may be, a committee may say, well, if we're going to have sewers, maybe we should look at the zoning bylaw and see if it's appropriate for, you know, a build-out that would happen if sewers come into West Acton, or should we change that bylaw, which I think some people are already looking at, including the Historic District Commission. So I think it will naturally include both, but clearly the sewers have to be one of the main focuses if we're going to move this concept forward.
So maybe if there was something like a sewer action committee, I mean, is that the kind of thing we want to do for now, rather than?
Are you talking about a separate committee or?
Well, or a committee for now, and then as of the fall, when we see what happens, reconstitute the committee to include people who really want to focus on all of the development committee issues of West Acton?
Go ahead, Janet.
I think that the focus has to be on sewering. You're going to have the reps of different committees who have their own vested interests or not in sewering West Acton, but should be, it doesn't have, Sewer Action Committee was what it was called before. I think this should probably be West Acton Sewer Committee or something. I don't know. You can come up with a jazzy name. But I think that the focus has to be on the sewering with the idea that is going to enable all of these other things that these different reps from the different committees are going to be able to talk to. I think that because that's why we already have an economic development committee, so presumably they can cover the ground insofar as economic development in West Acton is concerned. And I think that if you have a planning board person, and that person can also kind of deal with the zoning issues if there are anything. So I think it's good what you and Doug have talked about thus far, having different committee reps on board, and then having some at-large members to talk, to sort of take the generalist perspective. So,
Chin-Sung?
I also want to mention that I agree with Janet that I think the focus should be on the sewers, but I also think that communication, especially with sort of non-government entities, residents and businesses and whatnot, needs to be a major focus of this committee, and that this committee needs to really have a huge portion of its time dedicated to making sure that residents and business owners and other affected parties in the area who don't regularly follow sort of board meetings and whatnot and committee meetings are aware of the goings on and sort of what might happen with these sewers. I do think that it's important, like I said, that we make sure that this is something that that the residents and owners in the area want. If it's not something they want, I don't think we should be doing it. End of story. If it's something they want, then, you know, we can talk about specifics and all of that stuff. And so therefore, I think the first thing that we need to do is determine, is this something the people who live in the area and own businesses in the area want to do? Do they want sewers? If yes, then let's proceed. If not, then I think the issue is dead.
Katie, you want to add to this discussion?
Sure. I'll just say, Franny, just as general direction, I think I agree that this committee should be focused on sewers. It's a large enough issue in the area that I think it should be the sole focus. And so I think we can have a further discussion about the charge once you've got a draft. But I think just going forward, kind of focus it on the sewer issue, and then we can talk about it in detail when we have an actual charge to look at.
Does that give you enough direction, Franny?
Yes.
Okay. Yes.
I just had one more question. Thank you, Shinsung. I really appreciate that I don't want to burn valuable staff time and consulting dollars if this would go down in the end anyway. And that gets to my question. How much did we pay to get this design? So it's 10 grand or 100 grand, do you think? I think it's irrelevant to, I think it is relevant to know how much money it costs to get here and how much money it would cost to get to town meeting and do those surveys with, you know, an unbiased mind, as opposed to, we had a problem with the survey that went into the Spencer Tuttle, because it was sort of like, what kind of sewers would you like? You know, as opposed to, and it was just my opinion. I'm just saying that if I would work with you on such a survey that I think would be unbiased, that I could live with the results on, that we do that before we start burning a lot of money on consulting time. Thank you.
Okay, no further discussion on the sewers in West Acton. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Next item on the agenda is the Morrison Farmhouse discussion. Selectman Green.
Sure. So as everybody will hopefully remember, at our meeting a month or so ago, we discussed the Morrison Farmhouse uses, and at that time sort of eliminated carving out a private lot for the house. But as a next step, we wanted to discuss proposed actual uses for the house. And so I had agreed to put together a list of the proposed uses we had received from emails or suggestions from various folks, and put it into one document with the goal of tonight narrowing down this list to a couple proposed uses that we would want town staff to go forward and get more information on around the specifics about what that might entail, how much the proposals would cost, and potential sources of funding. I did not put on here any uses that would require having a private lot, as we had eliminated that. I also did not put on here tearing down the house, although I think that is a potential option that may still be on the table, but something we can look at as well. And there was one option on here that I'd put on that I did not put on, that we'd received an email about. That was a specific couple that proposed moving here, but then there was a follow-up email saying they were no longer doing that. So these are only things that are kind of still out there and the source of them. So again, I think the goal tonight is to narrow these down to a couple of the proposals that we want to get more information on from town staff, and then we can have a follow-up meeting to talk further about those ideas. So hopefully people have reviewed them and have a sense of what they might want to see.
Janet.
I have a question. When you were talking about the couple, were you talking about Pete and Jen? Because
No, actually, it was a different one about goats.
Oh, because I discovered, I guess I posted this on Facebook, because I was driving through Lincoln, going by the Codman Community Farm, and I saw all these chickens on a hill. And so I went and I looked up Codman Community Farm to find out why if those were their chickens or what it was. And then I found out that Pete and Jen are managing.
Right.
They're there, and I don't know if that's a long-term commitment, but I would assume that maybe, you know, we probably should confirm that they aren't interested in doing anything at Morrison, but.
Yeah, my understanding is they do move around some, so I don't think it would, that one I felt like was less off the table as opposed to goat ones that we had gotten a pretty firm confirmation that they were not moving forward. So, but yes, if that is one that we're interested in, we would have to, I think that would be part of the follow-up.
guess if no one is dying to go, I will jump in first. My view on this is pretty simple. I'm not in favor of any use which continues to have the town maintain and or be responsible for the continued upkeep of the house. And so therefore, if someone else wants to take on that responsibility, I would be open to that. I would rather the house not continue in its current location. I think that it blocks access in many ways to a very large property that has other uses and lots of other value. And so therefore, I think that would be good as well if the house can be moved somewhere. I understand that there's people who would like to save the house, and I'm sympathetic to those people. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I think that the town has sunk more money than it should have already into this house, and that continued maintenance and upkeep of this house is just not worth taxpayer dollars.
If I sort of summed up some of the ideas about it, I really feel like there are a good number of people who are interested in some kind of use related to farming. And when I look around Acton, I might be totally forgetting it. Do we have a public farm? I mean, we have personal community gardens, right? Is there another farm? What? Cougar is a private farm, right? Yeah. I mean, I'm asking if there's any town, if the town is involved with farming. The way Littleton owns Nagog Hill Orchards, and Lincoln now owns Codman Farm, and so I was just wondering I just wanted to make sure that this would be...
We own the Stonefield Farm, but it's run as a for-profit. It's leased to the...
We own Stone. No, we don't.
Well, Cowett is, right. It's part of Stonefield Farm, but we leased it back to them to run a for-profit farming operation.
I see a lot of really good ideas for using it. I agree it would be nice, Ching-Sung, to make it sort of pay for itself by someone keeping up and maybe having a farm business. But I also see a lot of potential for those, the person who wants a farm day program for people with disabilities, or a nonprofit farm like Gaining Ground. I think there are a lot of cooperative activities that could happen. And Kathy Fochman, who would like to see the horticultural therapy. I think there's a lot of human farming connections. And I'm not sure we have put out enough, like putting out an RFP and well publicizing it. There's so many people, I don't know if it's just my circles, but I'm seeing that most young people nowadays, there's so many people that are very committed to getting involved in farming and the food systems, and it's something that people are intensely concerned about. And I think that if we put out an RFP and correctly advertise it, we could get a program or a set of people or a couple or a person to manage the farm and do something like one of these programs. I don't mind the idea of moving it. I agree it sort of blocks it, and if it could be moved on the land. I don't have a personal attachment to that house. In general, I like historic houses, but I haven't heard a lot of I have heard some people talking about the historic value of that as to when it was built. I guess it was a Depression-era farm, and so it has value that way. So I wouldn't mind keeping the house, but I would really love to see one of these uses happen. I don't want to just give up on it. I don't want to just look at the house as a pile of wood. I would like to pursue, but maybe through the RFP process, come give us a proposal. What will you do for us in exchange for living in the house or having your organization in the house to make it valuable?
Okay, I think the biggest problem is cost. I mean, we were talking about over $100,000 just to fix the house up, to bring it up to code. If you're talking about handicap bathrooms, which are now on the second floor, as I understand it, you're talking about some pretty substantial costs, plus moving costs if you're talking about moving it. I'm not sure we're going to be able to find somebody who's going to agree to live there and farm the land and put $100,000 into the house. So that's an issue. But maybe we could just at least go down the list and strike the ones that are not appropriate. Preserve the site for future water supply development. I think that was the entire Morrison property, not just the site of the house. So I don't think anything we're going to do, even on the house site, is going to interfere with Acton Water District's, ability to drill a well there if they need to. Let's see. Potential satellite for senior center. Now that we have a new senior center, I don't think that makes sense. Do we need it for town offices if we're going to have the senior center okay?
And you'd have to make it accessible if you had a town office there, unless the
Right.
person working there wasn't going to meet any members of the public there. So.
What about storage for the cemetery equipment? I thought
That email also had a note that we don't really need that storage.
Right, yeah, because we
but I
updated-
just put
that's what
everything
I
on there.
Was that about the barn or was that about the house?
It was both the house and the barn. I just, again, I put every suggestion
Right.
on here that fit our criteria.
Franny, do you have a comment on that? You were the person who mentioned that. Is that, I thought we upgraded the Kennedy building to...
That hasn't been continued to be talked about by Cemetery Commission as,
Okay,
I mean,
but
also
we
the
have-
Harris Street.
We have
Harris Street, you got to remember, we bought it primarily for the barn in the back for storage for cemetery and natural resources.
Right.
Okay, so, I think it basically comes down to either moving the house someplace and utilizing it, for something elsewhere, or renting it out to some farm, or, horticultural therapy or handicap, assistance to people programs or whatever. I mean, those seem to me.
So I think those are
two
three ideas. And I think those are three ideas that probably need to be looked into separately. So there's moving the house and using it. Most of the suggestions related to that were related to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. Then there's having the house for renting it out for some nonprofit farm, like gaining ground or some sort of animal use. And then there's the third option of having the house for some sort of horticultural therapy or program for people with disabilities. Because I think those are honestly kind of three different programs that should be looked into as in terms of what it may cost to get the house to the point where we can put out an RFP and the moving costs, obviously, if we're talking about moving it, and then who those sort of programming people might be. And so I think that's what we want to look into, is to kind of get more information on the models. Again, for gaining ground, I think is inherited house are good models to talk about for the farming option. And then I don't know what models there are for this potential horticultural therapy or other stuff, but it seemed like there was at least some town staff interested in that. So I think we could get more information on what those three options might look like, and what the potential sources of funding and potential partners would be. And then for any of the point of doing this is then narrowing it down, that if we were to put out an RFP, we would have an actual, we would be putting out an RFP with actual parameters, and that's what we need. And we need to know how much it might cost us to get it to the point to be able to do that.
I would just throw in one other caution that comes to my mind is this concern about disposing of the piece of property and giving up, that was a sale, but a rental is really a disposal. If you're going to rent it to somebody who's going to be a caretaker or something, they're going to have the plot that goes with it.
So you don't have to sell it, though. That was the big difference, is that the town would still own the parcel.
Right, I understand that, but you're still going to be, the person who lives there is going to want to have, limit access to crossing their property to get to the gardens or whatever. I would assume. I mean, you could structure it any way, but that's going to be an issue if you're going to try to rent it. They're going to want to know what land goes with it and what, kind of control they have over it.
That would be one of the things to consider when considering putting this out or putting an RFP out. But the point is that renting it, we are allowed to kind of work those considerations in, versus if we were selling a parcel, then we no longer have access to it.
I have a question about the horticultural therapy. It's here paired with handicap bathrooms, which, are they talking about therapy in the building, or are they talking about on the grounds and then adding handicap bathrooms to the house, which is going to be a big expense because you have to make the whole house accessible? That's the problem with making it into a town office, is you have to make it accessible, which is not insubstantial expense.
Right. My memory of that is that there's a program that runs these kind of therapy programs, and they have staff, and they need space to, I mean, some of it's outside, obviously, in the gardens, but they do run part of their program indoors, I think, with staff people.
I think my understanding was that Kathy Fochman is already on her way to doing horticultural therapy programs there, making raised bed gardens, and the idea was that people are coming, it would be nice to have facilities, and that you could maybe just on the first floor make it into some facilities that you could do a little kitchen work, and you could have handicap bathrooms.
So I think that's why we would go back to town staff to kind of flesh out what that would look like and what the cost would be. And again, that's the point of tonight. We're not getting into the exact details, but kind of just saying these are the general areas of interest that we would want more information on what that might cost and entail and what are the sources of funding.
And we need to flesh out if we're talking about moving the house, where, and for what purpose, because they're the two options. One is to move it close to Ice House Pond and put on a new foundation, make it handicapped accessible. It's not clear, Franny, this was your suggestion on behalf of cemetery. Did they say what they wanted to do with the house, or just have it there as a decoration?
I think at the time we were talking about the fact that Bruce Freeman Rail Trail could use some facilities, people passing by. But
so
then,
what, have bathrooms there? Is that?
But I think I had sort of talked with two committees at the time about similar things, and one of them was the Commission on Disabilities, and so we talked more about having, I think it was for facilities. It's the same thing, the same idea.
But the Cemetery Commission said they wanted the house to be handicapped accessible. That sounds like something came out of
Right,
COD.
it was more for the same thing, having facilities for nearby activities.
It's just,
I think the COD was more concerned about activities at the farm, and cemetery was mentioning recreational activities nearby, both at the cemetery and also at Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. And so I actually see that, first of all, moving the house.
Okay, there's moving close to BFRT.
You said there were three options.
There are a lot of options. I was saying.
Well, she's three big categories.
In a way, it could be moving or not, but then what you do with it, it looks like there's two categories, one that has somebody living there and one that has the house just being used, right?
Sure. My understanding of the suggestions that had come in is that all of the moving ones were not involving somebody living there. The ones that people had made suggestions about moving the house were for use related to the Bruce Freeman Rail Trail. So either, handicapped bathrooms or some kind of bathrooms, and Historical Commission had suggested historic displays and other things there. But so it's just, I think on that one, the real cost is going to be moving the house and upgrading it for essentially just general access, keeping it in place and upgrading it to use for farming and somebody living there, or keeping it in place and upgrading it to use for some sort of horticultural therapy program. Those are the general themes that I'm kind of hearing as ones that people are interested in getting more information on. Again, we're not getting into the nitty-gritty details of what that exactly would be. I think that's why what we're going to ask town staff to come up with a little bit more of what those proposals would look like and what they would cost, where the funding might come from, and who the partners might be. We're not doing that tonight.
So are we talking about the recreation staff or natural
I think,
resources?
I mean, that will be up to the town manager. I think some of these different ones, it's going to depend on, the horticultural therapy one, probably Kathy has the most information on that. It seems like most of these would fit mostly into recreation and natural resources, but that's up to you about how he uses his resources.
May I just say one thing? That the parking lot at the Ice House Pond is being worked on by the Morrison Farm Committee, so please don't move the house on that.
We weren't talking about onto the parking lot.
Okay, I just want to make sure you weren't.
Yep.
Okay, can I ask a question? Is that space in between, I keep hearing the space to the right as you look at the house referred to as
the paddock.
The paddock. Can the house be moved to that area?
That's not generally what these suggestions have been. These have been moving it further down, almost past Ice House Pond, in between the area of there and Concord Road, or 2A.
Well, I don't think Cemetery Commission I might have worded it moving it closer to Ice House Pond. I think it was just a matter of moving it to the right. I don't think they got into the details of how far. So don't consider that one.
I thought there was an
The
issue
idea
with
of
one of the
the other
paddocks, if there's some horse bones.
It's a horse
or something.
graveyard.
I just- I'm sorry.
Do we want to narrow this down further to start to just say, either look at, you know, getting a program somehow in there, or renting it out to somebody who would be a caretaker for a farm or something like that, and leave the moving for later on, or?
No, because I think the
mean-
moving issue is separate. I really do think that one of the options I've heard a lot about is moving it and using it related to Bruce Fruman, and I think that's a very different option than using it for farming or for horticultural therapy.
Right. And you need to decide that up front.
Right.
Because you don't want to invest in the house where it is and then decide, oh, we want to move it. It's, you know, you have to,
Okay.
either we're going to move it or we're not going to move it. So,
You think you have enough direction, Steve, to
Work with you on it after, but.
it's going to be like the last
interrupt like Ann
time.
did to get a word in? Can I say something?
Sure. Well, we can open it to the public.
Well, I didn't want to interrupt, but I saw Ann, and I said, following her lead. First of all, thank you for thinking about reuse. We have a history of having a poor farm here in Acton. If you look at all the old records way, way back, that we were very proud of having the poor farm and a place where people could go and farm and eat food. And I encourage you to split up the building somehow and have the top part be living and then the bottom part be municipal space. Just because you don't move it doesn't mean the Bruce Fruman Rail Trail people can't put a sign saying restroom 100 feet that way. So thank you very much for that consideration too. I think these are all wonderful uses and I'd be in favor of any of them. I prefer not to move it and I prefer to have it focused on farming as opposed to moving it right next to the rail trail and be what? Empty building most of the time? Thank you very much. Oh, and one more thing. Can we give it to can we gift it, even if we gift just the top floor to to AHA, Acton Housing Authority? I think that we can do that. So if we don't want to run it, we can gift it if we condoize one part of it or something. Anyway, it's just an idea. Thank you for thinking of it.
Two quick considerations. One is that the property is seasonal. So, you know, once the cold weather shuts us down on the farm, it's over pretty much until the spring comes. So it's not a year-round, you know, situation there. The other comment I'd make is that if you move it down close to the rail trail, you've really got now a major public restroom opportunity for the trail. And you have a particularly frail building to serve as a community, you know, introduction to people on the trail and so on. It's Acton's presence on the trail right at that point. It's encouraging people to get off and whatnot. So you're going to have to provide parking. It's going to have access. You have to ask yourself if this house is the right, if we're going to have a building down there, if the house is the right thing to do, especially since we're going to spend easy $50,000 moving it there. Thank you.
I was just going to say something in opposite to what he said. There's a lot of winter farming that goes on. In fact, I work on a farm in Harvard, and we're starting our winter farming now. Thank you. Well, actually, we are.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
I mean, I think we've got a sense of the board. You're going to work with the town manager to try to get the staff moving in the right direction. Okay, thank you. Next item on the agenda is 2017 license renewals. I'm understanding all these things on this list we're asking to renew the licenses?
Yeah,
Okay.
So I'll move that we approve the license to expose, keep for sale, and to sell all kinds of alcoholic beverages to be drunk on premises as listed in the renewal master list, section 12.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? Motion passes. You're going to go through each one of these, Katie?
Sure. I move we approve retail packaged goods store license to expose, keep for sale, and to sell all kinds of alcoholic beverages not to be drunk on premise as listed in the master renewal list, section 15.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions?
Okay, Okay, I move we approve the retail packaged goods store license to expose, keep for sale, and to sell wines and malt beverages not to be drunk on premise as listed in the master renewal list, section 15.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion passes.
I move we approve the common victual license to expose, keep for sale, and to sell wines and malts to be drunk on premise as listed in the master renewal list, section 15.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous.
I move we approve the carry-in brown bag licenses as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously.
I move we approve the Class 2 used car licenses as listed in the master renewal list.
A second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously.
I move this, shocking every time. I move to approve the Class 1 new car licenses as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, that's unanimous.
I move to approve the entertainment licenses as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously.
I move we renew bowling alley and billiard table licenses as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, unanimous.
I move to approve the 24-hour permit as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Unanimous.
Okay, I move we approve automatic amusement devices as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That passes unanimously.
I move to approve a taxi cab license as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Passes unanimously.
I move to approve a taxi cab driver's license as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, that's unanimous.
This is my favorite one. I move to approve a license to tell fortunes for money as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? None.
I move to approve the following common victual licenses as listed in the master renewal list.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? Hearing none, that's unanimous. On to
That's
the
all of
next item on the agenda. Is any public comment on that? Okay. On to the consent agenda. Number 4, request to dispose of obsolete material from the Acton Memorial Library. Number 5, one-day alcoholic beverage license, Raymond Paradiso, November 26, 2016. Number 6, sidewalk fund gift acceptance, Mohegan Lane Subdivision. Number 7, request for an extension in operating hours from the Red Raven. That's for the day before Thanksgiving and the day before New Year's. Number 8, request for extension of operating hours from Tailgaters. Number 9, request for extension of operating hours from Kmart. I believe that's for Black Friday. Number 10 is meeting minutes of July 25, 2016. Number 11 is decision on Idlewild Farm site plan special permit. I'm going to hold that. I'll entertain a motion to accept the consent agenda items numbers 4 through 10.
So moved.
All in favor, please say aye.
Second.
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, any abstentions? Hearing none. The consent agenda 4 through 10 is accepted. Let's see, I got to look up
Well, that's the decision.
hold on, I got to find the opinion. I had one small change on this decision. The issue came up of not only deliveries late at night, but loading their trucks for their own operation going out at night. So let's see. conditions. It says, now the motion generally, and that was mentioned in an email that a citizen sent, and I think it was mentioned in her testimony. The other person came up afterwards, and we wouldn't let her talk about it, but it is part of the record, and I understood the motion to say we'll put in the conditions that were discussed during the meeting and part of the record. So, well, 3.2.14 says the applicant shall make a diligent and ongoing effort to reduce delivery services occurring outside the hours of 5 a.m. to 7 p.m. I would add the words to reduce delivery and loading services, because I think that covers not only deliveries from other companies to them, but they're loading their own trucks to take off. I did check with Corey York. It is physically possible to shut off those beepers when trucks back up, but it would be illegal, so I don't think we should go there with that. But I would just add the reduced delivery and loading services occurring outside of 5 a.m. to 7 p.m.
Well, I move to approve with the amendment that you proposed.
Second.
All in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
And that passes, and I'll take it that that's permission for me just to sign it with that minor revision. Okay, I believe that completes the agenda, and I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
We have to sign a bunch of
So moved.
licenses in case you're...
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay, we are adjourned. Thank you.